Yeah. Oh wait, actually, let me change this so that I'm going to make it so that my slides are optimized for video clips because I have a couple of videos. And then I'm going to switch back to this. Nope, that's not right. Hold on. And then, okay. And then I get my little video panel. Okay, we're all in place. So you guys can see my screen okay?
Looks great.
The right screen? All right, perfect. Small correction, I'm a doctor now. I was just telling Andy, as of last Thursday, I defended my dissertation and now I got a fancy title, woohoo. So this is a really fun little celebration. This is my first Firefly talk since becoming a doctor because it's only been a week. And it's just like, it's just gonna be really fun. I just wanna tell you some of my favorite things about fireflies and this whole thing. And I also want it to be pretty informal. So if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat. I'm going to keep an eye on that. And also just, ask me throughout. If you're curious about stuff, we can talk about anything. And I'm going to go until around 8. Is that correct?
That's fine.
Yeah. And then you can kick me off. Okay. So start with a little quote. This is, I found this in the Ph.D. thesis of Jim Lloyd, a very, very famous firefly researcher who passed away a couple of years ago. And of course, he got it from this Japanese poet. I just think it's so nice, and because it is true. I mean, by watching fireflies, we can find out a lot about ourselves and natural wonder and just like how amazing the world is and how magical. And I just think there's something really, really nice about that. So here's a firefly. Just kidding. This is a moth. I found this image online. I couldn't believe it. So we're going to start by debunking some things about fireflies. They are not moths. They are not flies. They're not bugs, even though they're called lightning bugs. They're actually beetles. And they are beetles with this very impressive ability to create their own light. Let me open the, yep, okay. This is in dark here, a picture of a firefly. You can see a beautiful beetle, and it is helpfully going to give us the outline of my talk. So first, I want to just talk about bioluminescence, what it is, how it works. And then I am going to indulge myself, because I can, and talk about some bioluminescent insects that aren't fireflies, because I think this is really interesting. Most people have no idea that these things exist, and we're going to go through them. So that is what a firefly is not. And then we're going to talk about what a firefly is, and 5 firefly genera, which you can think of as 5 groups of fireflies, and they're the ones that you're most likely to see around here. They're the ones I see in Concord all the time. Mostly the last one, though, is the one of particular interest because it is been really well studied as far as its sexual communication using bioluminescent signals. And so I'm going to talk about that. Probably not talk about firefly vision, actually. I don't think I'll get to that, because I want to leave some space for firefly conservation, a little bit of a nice message at the end there. So let's talk about bioluminescence. Oof, beautiful. There are all sorts of things on Earth that can glow. Some of them are on land, most of them are in the water, actually. And they are across all sort of branches of the tree of life. You got fungi, plants, sea stars, squid, I mean, pretty much anything you can imagine. And everything that glows on Earth, well, first of all, many of them are featured in this amazing documentary, which let me recommend, David Attenborough's Light on Earth. They invented special cameras so they could record some of these things, and it's just really cool stuff. But also, everything that glows on Earth uses the same basic process. So here's a field of fireflies, and each individual little flash of light here is produced by a firefly, a beetle, specifically using his abdominal light organ, or lantern is what we call it. And inside that lantern, there are 2 components of a chemical reaction. what we call luciferin and luciferase. And Lucifer comes from light bringer, which is a bit funny, but it just means, because it brings light. And so it's an enzymatic reaction. Basically, you know how like lactase breaks down lactose? Well, luciferase breaks down luciferin, and this process releases a little burst of light. And the whole thing is mediated by oxygen, which is kind of similar to a glow stick, actually. A glow stick has two components, and when you break it and mix them together, they react. When you mix these two components together in the presence of oxygen, they react and they glow. And actually, that is the reason why, it was just a fun fact about fireflies, they often glow after they die. And especially, I don't know if any of you who caught fireflies as kids ever did something similar to what the children did featured in this poem, namely catching fireflies and smearing them on your arm or on your nails. And if you do this, which I wouldn't recommend, that glow will continue for several minutes. And that's because you've mixed the components of the chemical reaction together and exposed them to oxygen, and now it gives off light. Really nice poem that I like very much. But not to indulge too much in literary things, here we love evolution. This is a beautiful tree of life. It's got all of our favorite things in it. We've got the worms, we've got the mollusks, we've got insects are kind of over here. And all of these are colored according to whether or not they glow. And so you can see a lot of blue. All of that is bioluminescent ocean life. And then green is bioluminescent things on land. And there's actually not very many things on land that glow, which is kind of interesting. And we could wonder why that is. But I just want to zoom into this section and turn it the right way, where we can look at sort of the evolution of things that glow in the arthropod group, which includes crustaceans and insects. And so we have a lot of glowing crustaceans and then a couple glowing insects. And that's what I'm interested in and what we're going to talk about. But also down here, by the way, some centipedes and millipedes actually glow. These are, this is a really generous long exposure photograph. If you saw this thing in real life, you would never know that it glowed unless you were in a totally dark room and like really looking at it. Oh, and here's what is this? A Columbella, a springtail, which is itty bitty and also barely glows at all. So we're just gonna move on from it and go to this part of the tree of life. So here are all the insects. We just talked about that springtail. We don't care about it. Next up here is the insect order Diptera, which is mosquitoes, flies, and fungus gnats, and all sorts of really gross things, including a rather amazing, really gross thing, the cave glowworm. I'm going to show you a brief video, hopefully. So these things, this is sort of, they live on the ceilings of caves and sort of muddy banks, and they're mostly found in Australia and New Zealand, but there are actually some species in the US, mostly around Tennessee area, I think. And they have this amazing blue glow and this weird string, just this crazy way of being in the world. And what we're seeing are actually, so it looks like this, on the video. If you light it up a little bit, this is what we're seeing. So in here, this long object is like the larva of a sort of mosquito-y type thing. So honestly, it's a maggot, pretty much. It's a maggot, and also it's built itself a little hammock out of slime where it lives. In its little hammock, it slides around on the ceiling. It produces a blue light from its tail, from its butt, and it also makes these strings of sticky snot, essentially, that hang down. And the reason it does this is because it lives in caves, and in the caves, there are streams with a lot of insect larvae in them. The larvae will sort of pupate and come out as adults. And what do insects do when they see lights? They fly to them. And so this light acts as a trap. And these larvae then eat whatever is attracted to the light. So they're using their light as a lure. And it's a really effective and very clever thing to do. And I just think it's very impressive. Oh, cool. Barbara saw them in New Zealand. I've never seen them. Also, fun fact, this is what they look like as adults. And it's been observed that the females, let me move the chat, the adult females have a little light organ. So they seem to glow as well. And that might not be to lure in food because it doesn't seem like they would eat as adults. It might instead be to attract mates, which is something very similar to what fireflies do, but it's really not been very well explored. So I'm just going to move on. I'm going to move on to beetles, which if we go back here, so we did Diptera or flies, we got the cave glowworms, and now everything else that glows on land that we're going to talk about is a beetle in the order Coleoptera. Beetles are amazing. Here is a click beetle, sometimes called a pinywale. And you can see it has these two organs on the back of its head. And when you tap it, it sort of glows at you. And I think this video is really good because it just shows that I think the glow means that they're a little annoyed, right? So they're using this as a warning signal to try to tell you to not do that. And so here you can see the light organs again. But these click beetles are actually really amazing insects because they not only have these organs on their back or sort of their head area, they also have a little abdominal lantern, just like a firefly on their tummy. And we don't really know what they use this light for, but as you can kind of tell from this long exposure photograph here, the click beetle is perched and then it takes off and starts flying this way. The lights on its back flash and the light on its stomach is sort of this constant glow. So maybe that is also some way of advertising itself, maybe a sexual signal. So this is the adult form of these beetles. As larvae, they look like this. Here's the head of one sticking out of a termite mound. And so much like the cave glowworms, these larvae will use their lights as a lure to lure in insects and eat them. And they make their homes in these termite mounds where it's very nice and air conditioned and all that, and they can just sit there and have the food fly to them. It's a pretty good way of living. I really love this photo, by the way, because it won a very fancy nature photography award, which was later retracted because it was discovered that this anteater was stuffed and the whole photo was framed. And the best part of it is like, you really don't even need the anteater. It's an amazing photo regardless, but a little bit of controversy there. But anyway, these are click beetles and they're amazing, and that's all I'm going to say about them. Then there's other really strange beetles that look like this. They're called railroad worms or star worms or diamond worms, and they have these really cool spots all along their body, and we know very little about them, which you can tell because look how low resolution these pictures are. It's just, very mysterious, not very well understood. So there we have it. These are all of the insects that glow, and I want to touch on two insects that you might have heard glow, but don't. The first is the fingotid or lantern bug. It's literally called a lantern bug, or no, it's not fingotid. And they're in the family Fulgoridae, and Fulgorid means fire or light, I think. I kind of forget. And so the name might suggest that they glow, but they don't. But there, I think, are sort of legends or tales where people used to think that in particular their noses glowed because their noses are very sort of pronounced, and they also kind of fluoresce, and if you give them backlighting they'll kind of do something like that. So people thought that these glowed for a very long time, thus called them lantern bugs or lantern flies, but they don't. The spotted lanternfly you may have heard of. It's a very invasive insect. It's one of these. It doesn't glow despite the name. And then if you were really carefully covering the insect news back in around 2013, you may have heard of this cockroach that supposedly glows, called a headlamp cockroach or something like that. There was this whole paper that came out suggesting that these spots on its back are meant to imitate the spots of a click beetle. But this photo is of a dead specimen and nobody's ever seen a live specimen actually glow. So I'm going to say that that is not true. Technically possible, but really unlikely to be true. So here's my little evolutionary tree of things that glow in the dark at night for when you're wandering around in the dark. If you see a blue glow with a lot of drips, that's probably a fly, a cave glowworm. And otherwise, if it's greenish, it's probably a beetle, either a click beetle with these nice 2 dots, one of those weird railroad worm, star worm things, or most likely, by far the most likely, a firefly. Fireflies are the most successful bioluminescent organism on land by far. There are over 2,000 species on every continent except Antarctica, and they're just they might not seem like it, but they're very common, relatively speaking. Oh yeah, and those are the names of the families. We don't need to know that, that's fine. Okay, so we've covered what a firefly is not. And now I want to talk about what a firefly is. And like I said, it's not just one thing. There's 2,000 different species. There is a lot of diversity. And even around here in Concord and in the nearby areas, you see a lot of species. So I'm going to show you 2 videos. The first was taken in Madison Field in Concord. I'm going to ask at the end if anybody has been there. It's like my secret field. And this video has should be showing a very slowly moving glow. This is a field full of Pyractomina sinuata fireflies that do this very characteristic sort of haunting glow as they sort of fly above the ground. Right next door at Smith Andover Field in Lincoln, at around the same time, you can get a view like this, where you see the triple flashing Phytinus obscuralis firefly, as well as in a second, a couple of those rising spark single flashing Phytinus marginalis. I'll play it again and try to point it out. So you see in the top right, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 in the back. And then on the right, you start seeing these little slow rising sparks. And so these are—
Is this a possum hunting? Is this how we're hunting possums today, right?
No, we're talking about fireflies.
Please mute yourself and feel free to ask questions in the chat or after Dr. Owens finishes.
It got a sig up.
All right.
So you're seeing 2 very different species in the same spot, and this is really common. We'll see sometimes 10 or so species in one area. So really great diversity. One thing that you're not going to see around here is something very incredible. If you go take a brief detour to Pennsylvania, you might see something like this, synchronizing fireflies that flash all together. These are called, these are, Phytinus carolinus, or synchronous fireflies. And could somebody make me a co-host, perhaps?
Yeah, good tobacco.
Sure. I just got rid of him.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's just what I was going to do, but yes.
So keep expelling them, please, Andy.
Well, this is great. This we can run. And so hopefully you've been able to see what I'm trying to get at, which is that some fireflies, when they're present in a lot, when they're really, really dense, they will synchronize and do this sort of amazing display. And it might on first glance not look like synchrony, but as you kind of keep watching, which we've had a little chance to do, you can see that it all kind of goes dark together. And then there's a couple bursts where they're really, really sort of all together. That's about as good as it gets in North America. But then if you take a longer detour to Thailand or Malaysia, you might see something like this. This is a video in real time of really, really tight synchrony, which is just like sort of one of the most amazing things that animals do. And can you believe it's just evolved to do this, you know? It's just like evolution is truly amazing. So I've given you a little bit of an idea of the broad diversity of sort of what you might see if you're wandering around outside, but I also want to give you an appreciation of all the stuff that you don't see, because there is a lot that goes on in a firefly's life that we are not party to. To start, here they are as an egg. Everything in here is going to become that beautiful beetle. But first it turns into a larva, which at the beginning, they're really itty bitty. They look, I think they're very cute. You may disagree. And then they hatch, they go different places, which I'll get into, but they sort of crawl around and live their life. And around here, they live as larvae for 2 full years. So they are spending actually most of their life running around, growing into these very cute little guys. And then at the very, very end, about 2 summers after they were laid as an egg, they pupate. Just like a butterfly has a chrysalis, these guys pupate into this little form here, and then they eclose or become adults. And this one is very fresh, so she's still drying her wings. You can see they're going to turn black as they dry out. So when we look at videos of fireflies and talk about them, we're really only talking about this part of their life, and it's such a small part. They don't eat during this part of their life. It only lasts a couple weeks. All they're interested in doing is finding other fireflies to mate, lay eggs, and start the next generation. So this is kind of generally how it works around here, but once again, there's a lot of exceptions and just a lot of diversity. These photos were not taken from around here. These are from my friend Oliver, who went to Hispaniola. He had a great time. He saw all these like incredible looking sort of colors and shapes. But you do see incredible diversity even here. So you can see fireflies that are really tiny and have really tiny lanterns, and fireflies that are really big and have really big lanterns, and fireflies that don't have any lanterns at all because they don't flash. Instead, like other beetles, they use pheromone cues to communicate. And so they have evolved these gigantic antlers, these feathered antennae that help them sense others of their kind in the environment. And I think these fireflies are just beautiful. They really sometimes look like little reindeer, just absolutely gorgeous. But adults can look even more different than that. So some of them have really well-developed wings and very strong legs. And some of them have half wings, really kind of tiny, bad wings. And then some of them have no wings at all. This is an adult blue ghost firefly female, which looks just like a larva, right? And they're itty bitty bitty. So huge diversity of shape there. And here is a California pink glowworm. Again, this is an adult female. She's bright pink. This is another fun fact about fireflies. They have a lot of pink pigment in them. And this is a firefly just like all the others. As larvae, fireflies are also super diverse. So here are 4 species of firefly and what they look like as larvae. It's just like incredibly different, right? And also they live in different places. So fireflies in East Asia, a lot of them the larvae live in water. They're fully aquatic. You find them in streams and lakes. Around here, most of the larvae live in the soil. They're subterranean, although some of them, which look like here in the upper right, actually live on tree trunks, and they'll just sort of stick to the trunk of a tree their entire life. And then you see bigger ones. We don't have these, unfortunately. This one is from Singapore, but you can see these really big species that they kind of live in the leaf litter. So they're actually on the surface a lot of the time, even though you might not know it. And you get a huge diversity of size once again. So when we rear larvae in the lab, they start at less than a millimeter, just itty bitty, and they eventually get to be around maybe that big if you're lucky. Whereas again, in Singapore, you can see these enormous, just enormous larvae. Really, really cool. And you may have noticed from this photo that larvae can glow, firefly larvae glow. And because we hopefully have established at this point that firefly flashing has to do with sexual communication, it might be a little puzzling why the larvae would glow. Well, actually, they're the first ones who evolved the ability to bioluminesce. They use their lanterns. They have that same luciferin-luciferase reaction, their little light organs. And they do it because, much like a monarch, they're trying, a monarch has that orange and black coloration. Fireflies have this bright green bioluminescence to advertise the fact that they're toxic. They have these compounds in their blood called lucibuphigins, another great word, which are really, really unpalatable to birds and toads and actually capable of killing a small lizard, I think someone told me once. So really toxic, and a predator doesn't want to eat a firefly larva and die, and a firefly larva doesn't want to be eaten. And so the two come to an agreement. The larvae advertise that it's toxic, the predators learn not to eat them, and sort of they all get along. And firefly adults are almost always toxic as well. And here's a fun fact. They actually engage in this process called reflex bleeding, which if you've caught a lot of fireflies, you may have noticed. Sometimes your hands will smell a little weird afterwards. And that's because the fireflies have bled on you, sort of just exuding their lucibuphigins and trying to give you an idea that, you should not eat them. Not that you would want to. And this is my favorite scientific diagram in the whole world, because these authors just graphed where these droplets come out of fireflies that they grabbed, and you see this like interesting distribution of the spots that the compound comes out of. And then I think one final fun fact about fireflies is that they are predators. They are carnivorous. So here, I love this stock photo. Here's a Pyractomina larva eating a snail. They have, once again, a sort of toxin in their mandibles that they can inject into prey and sort of dissolve them into goo and then slurp it up. It's really gross. And so some species specialize on snails, while others eat earthworms. So here's a photo of some of our larvae in the lab. You can see they're really tiny, just chomping on a tiny chunk of earthworm, which is way bigger than they are, chowing down. And then other species like these ones here, we actually feed them cat food in the lab, and they seem to like that pretty well. You get a little wet. They're generally scavengers, so they'll eat pretty much anything as long as it's vaguely meaty. So maybe a little bit different than most people's idea of fireflies. People tend to have these very romantic notions, but actually they're very grisly predators. And I always found it very funny because keeping fireflies in the laboratory, you think it's going to be so amazing, but every day we're going into the lab, we have to chop up earthworms, and then you feed them earthworms. There's blood everywhere and earthworm goo, and it smells terrible. And it's just like definitely not what you would imagine getting into firefly research. So that is what a firefly is. That's the real story. And now I want to talk about some of the fireflies that you're likely to see around here, which I'm going to divide into 5 basic types. And I'm going to use the scientific names, but I'm going to try to keep it not too bad. So we have these 5 types. Oh, and you'll notice they all start with P. This is a huge problem in the field. Nobody has fixed this. It's because like all of the light words start with P, pyre, photo, you know, and it's just a big mess. But anyway, we've got Photurus, Pyractomina, Phytinus, Lucidota, and Elychnia. And if you want to learn more than what I can sort of zoom through right now, I really recommend this very awesome book by Lynn Faust, who is the current sort of firefly expert of North America. She's written and focused on the fireflies of the East and Central US. So a lot of this stuff will be pretty applicable to you. And there's like really cool diagrams of all sorts of, it's just a really great book, great photos. So you may have noticed, okay, a couple slides ago, I was like, look how diverse fireflies are. Wow, they're so amazing. And then we get here, it's like, they might look the exact same to you. They look pretty similar, right? And all of the fireflies we get around here do look pretty similar, especially just kind of on first glance. And that's actually for a reason. It's a mimicry complex. And so they're trying to reinforce the idea that something that's red, black, and yellow is not good to eat. Just like the bioluminescent flashes are a warning signal, their coloration is also a warning signal. And you actually get some really cool, you know, fun evolution where other non-toxic insects have evolved to resemble fireflies and benefit from this guise as being sort of toxic and non-edible, even though, you know, these moths are totally delicious, but a bird might be confused. So this is actually a longhorn beetle, not chemically defended, totally delicious, but it has, you know, it looks a lot like a firefly, and it even has this little fake lantern, which is just a white or yellowish segments of its abdomen trying to fool predators. And then some people say that cockroaches will do this as well. I think it's a bit of an edge case, but maybe if you have the right lighting, they kind of do look like fireflies. So, okay, here's our 5 types, and I'm going to rule 2 of them out right away and make this a little bit easier. So the 2 on the bottom, Lucidota and Elychnia, you can kind of tell them apart from the others because they have fully black wings. And that's actually pretty apropos because these are what we call daytime dark fireflies. They don't have light organs, they don't flash or glow. They just act like normal beetles. And so you're likely to find them on trees or in the grass, and you'll find them during the day flying around. So just like normal beetles. It's just when you look at them, you're like, oh, it really looks like a firefly, but it doesn't have a lantern. And so for that reason, they're slightly less interesting. So I'm just gonna like skip past them and forget about them and zoom in to these 3 types. And I'm gonna put up some different pictures. So we got Photurus, Phytinus, and Pyractomina. So I'm going to talk about Photurus. These are pretty famous. You may have heard of them before. They're also called femme fatales because very famously they eat other fireflies, and they do it by sort of luring them in and then chowing down. And I said that fireflies don't eat as adults. This is the one exception. They do this because they're interested in acquiring those lucibuphigins, those toxic chemicals, because they don't produce them on their own. Another really interesting evolutionary story. I don't really have time to go into it, but I highly recommend this Deep Look video. It has amazing footage and it really tells the story very well. One thing I somehow do have time to go into, however, is this really interesting distinction between, basically, it's almost always super easy to tell a male firefly from a female firefly, which if you're an entomologist is very exciting and interesting. And hopefully you think that it's exciting and interesting as well. So the trick for Photurus fireflies, both of the male and the female, their lanterns look similar. They both have these 2 sort of yellowish segments, but in the males, the entire thing lights up, while in the females, you only get a little bit of it. So you get this sort of chevron shape or like an equal sign. And that is a classic sort of feature of a female Photurus. And those are the femme fatales that do the luring and the eating. So it's kind of worth knowing what they are, knowing what they look like. Okay, so Photurus are pretty easy to tell apart from other fireflies just because Well, the classic feature is that they have these hunched shoulders, but they're also just gigantic. They're really bright. They're really sort of spidery, and they move very fast because they're full of calories from all of those fireflies that they're eating. And they're kind of mean and just, bad vibes. Whereas the other two groups over here are really sweet. And these are sort of our classic childhood fireflies. Most research has been done on the group Phytinus. Very little is known about the group Pyractomina. But in behavior, they're pretty similar, honestly, and it can be hard to tell them apart. The one sort of reliable feature is that Pyractomina tend to have this ridge along their, it's called a head shield or a pronotum, and Phytinus don't. It's pretty smooth. But that's like kind of in the weeds, right? That's an entomologist fact. And I know that it's a niche fact because now that you know it, you know more than whoever wrote the Wikipedia article for Pyractomina, because that is a Phytinus firefly. So it's not like a commonly known thing. One day I'll fix this, but not today. There is actually a way to tell Pyractomina apart from Phytinus besides the head shield, but you have to have females, which is a whole other issue. So the males in both groups, their lanterns look like this. Whereas once again, the females have their lantern reduced in some sort of a way. And in Pyractomina, they divide it into these 4 triangles. Whereas in Phytinus, they have this beautiful little upside down heart. Their heart-shaped lantern is very characteristic. So you're unlikely to find a female of either group out in the field, but if you do, it's pretty easy to tell who's who, and it can be easier to diagnose the females than the males on first glance. Now, there's of course a much easier way to generally tell who is who, and I kind of got at it earlier when we were watching those videos, which is that fireflies tend to have very specific flash patterns that are sort of diagnostic of their species. And the reason they do this is because you often, like I said, have a lot of species in one area and it's just complete visual chaos. And if you can't tell who's your species, you might try to mate with the wrong species, and this could be very bad, speaking in terms of your chance of making more fireflies, right? And so fireflies have adopted this species-specific flash behavior. So when you go out and you see flashes, you can count them and then sort of consult Lynn's book or a chart maybe and identify the species based on what you see. Sometimes you have to do particular timings. It can get a little complicated, but often it's not that bad. Like the videos I was showing earlier, it was like one's doing 3 flashes, one's doing 1 flash. It's not so bad. So I'm going to show you a photo of this species. This is Phytinus pyralis. And in this species, we don't get these around here, sadly, but those of you who mentioned Tennessee or seeing fireflies somewhere else, if you've ever seen fireflies in the South or in Chicago, actually, you've probably seen this species. It's the most common firefly in the US, called the Big Dipper firefly because they do this fun little dip as they J-shaped flash, very characteristic. And each flash is separated by about 6 seconds. I'm front loading all this information so I can walk you through this video. Can they bite people? Someone asks. Actually, yes. Usually it doesn't hurt, but some of these guys will bite you, and I've never felt it. I always just think it's kind of cute. And then I went on a trip to Costa Rica and caught some of them there, and it really hurt. So I think it's a size thing. Go figure. I was fine though. I've made a full recovery. Okay, so we're gonna watch this firefly, and here he is. So he goes flash, flash 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flash 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He flashes off screen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and flash, and then again. So, I mean, you could really set your watch by it, right? This is very predictable behavior. And also, I really like this video because hopefully you can see. So he starts here. The firefly will sort of hover, he'll flash, and then he kind of hovers in place. And it's almost as if he's looking for something, right? He's advertising that he's there, and then he's waiting to hear a response. That's the other half of the firefly, what we call a courtship dialogue. The male flashes, he looks at the ground, and he hopes to see a response flash from a female. And the female flash will look a certain way, the male flash looks a certain way. And you know, if the stars align and they make a love connection, then the male keeps talking to the female and eventually lands next to her, and the two come together and mate. If the male is unlucky or maybe not that smart, he'll fall for the flashes of these predatory femme fatales who are pretending that they want to mate with the males, but actually once the male gets there, they sort of tackle him and eat him. And so all of this information is really standardized within these groups. So we can measure it and we can talk about it. So I'm going to show you a video of Phytinus greenii, which is around here. These are all over Lincoln and Concord. And in this species, the males do a double flash, 1, 2, and the female responds. And like other species, the amount of time that she takes to respond tells the male that she's the right species. If she waits too long or if she's too eager, he's going to be suspicious. So that timing is really important, as is his timing. So the video is going to pop up right here. The male is on top and the female is on bottom. So the male goes 1, 2 in response. And then there's sort of this period of darkness. The male moves a little bit to the left, 1, 2 in response. And so once again, it's all very formulaic, very standardized. And so people have gone and looked at, measured these various, what we call flash parameters. You can plot them on an evolutionary tree and see how fireflies have evolved different kind of languages. So you have flash trained species that do big bursts of like many flashes, and then you have double flashing species like Phytinus greenii, where you get the males, these are all male flashes, by the way, and then single flashing species. And in all of these species, these are flash patterns that repeat over and over and over again. And each male flash pattern has a sort of designated female response. And all of these timings, like I said, are really informative. So the last thing I want to touch on is as regards firefly communication is so flashing is mostly for love. That's usually why fireflies are doing it out there. But there's actually sort of a complexity of behavior that I think is really interesting. So I have divided firefly communication, as I understand it, into sort of 5 reasons for flashing. The first is love. Fireflies flash to find mates. The second we've already covered is using it as a lure, using it to lure in males so you can eat them. So the femme fatales do this, right? Very, very deviously. The third is my favorite. So sometimes fireflies will flash purely because they want to see where they're going. They literally use it as a flashlight. They're flying around in the dark. If you want to land on a plant, you flash right before you land so you can see where you're going to land. Fireflies flash when they're injured. We talked about this before. If you smear them on, or they glow rather when they're injured. If you smear them on your arm, they'll glow like that. And they also have what's called an alarm flash, which kind of harkens back to the warning flash that larvae do, which is this idea of warning predators not to eat them. And what's really cool is if you spend a lot of time out in the field looking at these guys, you can start to interpret what they're trying to say when they flash. So a flash for love, a courtship flash is very sort of regimented and periodic. A lure is really similar, except it tends to be a lot brighter because this group, they're just very bright and aggressive. I don't know how else to say it. They're just like really intense. If the firefly is trying to see where they're going, it's usually accompanied with a movement right before they land on a plant or as they're sort of going through some sort of obstacle. If they get injured, you get this constant glow. It's like the glow stick's been broken. It's all kind of leaking. And if they're mad, you get a very different kind of like flash, 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 which is, I think, really well conserved kind of across the tree of life, this idea of, when a bird is really mad, what does it do? It goes like, caw, 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 like it just like goes and goes and goes. This idea of like just alarm, I think, is very similar. So that is what fireflies are saying when they flash. Okay, I'm going to take 5 more minutes and skip past firefly vision and talk about firefly conservation. So there are 167 species of firefly in North America, and I've represented them all here as little flashes. And 35 of them were described in 2018, so we don't know a lot about them. But of the rest, all of them have had their conservation status assessed for inclusion in the IUCN Red List, which if you ever hear about endangered animals that are red listed, this is the list. It's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And the people who did it found that most species of firefly are data deficient. We don't know almost anything about them. And of those that remain, about 1/3 are in some sort of conservation situation. They're of some level of conservation concern, which could mean that up to this amount, 60% or so of fireflies are sort of in need of our help, let's say. It could be less than that, but certainly it's worth thinking about. And there's a lot of reasons a firefly might be endangered. We did a survey of firefly experts from around the globe and had them rank different things that fireflies have to worry about, and habitat loss is sort of the major thing. Light pollution comes in second, and then pesticide use and water pollution. And actually in North America, experts rank pesticide use as slightly more of a threat to fireflies than light pollution. I think that's probably correct. We use a lot of pesticides in North America, but I study light pollution, so I'm biased. I think light pollution is a really big deal. But as a sort of visual indicator of what I'm talking about, this is habitat loss for a firefly. This is not where a firefly is supposed to live. Fireflies need nice sources of water. They need good ground cover, like fallen leaves and little plants and stuff for the larvae to live in, and then little plants for the females to crawl on so they can display, and all those sorts of things. And when you mow a lawn during the summer, you're very likely mowing down just a lot of female fireflies, and that's really, really bad for fireflies. They're the ones that make the next generation. Pesticides needs no explanation, honestly. I mean, pesticides kill, especially insecticides, kill insects. Fireflies are insects, and in particular, pesticides designed to kill lawn, the sort of beetle grubs that eat your lawn. Fireflies are beetles, so those are sort of especially bad. And then light pollution is this interesting thing that it might not seem sort of on the surface that important, but actually it turns out to be really important because it interferes with firefly signals. And I've done quite a bit of work on light pollution, which I'm just gonna skip over because honestly, I can just tell you the results. So it's like pretty easy to understand. Firefly flashes, they show up really well against darkness, and then against different colors of light, they're really hard to see. And so if that color of light is similar at all to the color of a firefly flash, it's going to be even worse. And also fireflies are red-green colorblind, which makes a certain kinds of light, especially amber and yellow light, just really confusing for them. And so if you want to learn more about firefly-friendly lighting, I worked with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation to make a set of firefly-friendly lighting guidelines. I'm going to put the link in the chat, but okay, actually, I'll do that right now. Hold on, scroll, and you can read it as I do. So these are just really, really simple things that you can do to make sure that the fireflies in your backyard are happy. And they're guidelines that are good for all sorts of nocturnal wildlife, because it's all about minimizing harm, right? If you don't need a light, don't have it. If you need a light, put it on a timer or a motion activator, really simple things. And it also sort of, they favor red lighting, which is kind of least disruptive to fireflies. They don't see it very well. I see a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll get to, but I want to wrap up these slides. So if the fireflies in your backyard aren't doing very well for whatever reason, and you want to go see some, there's a couple places that I really super love to go firefly watching in the summer. Around Concord, huge recommend Estabrook Woods and Punkatasset, that area. In June, the populations of Phytinus greenii in the woods are incredible. They're like little fairies floating through the woods. It's just like stunning. And then in July, you start getting some fireflies in that sort of in the field areas, the open fields. You can also see them at Northbridge, but you're not supposed to go there after night, so don't do it. The rangers will get mad at you. And then my absolute favorite spot near Concord is not even on this map. This is why I consider it my little secret. Madison Field. It's right here. I don't know if any of you have been to it. It is just a giant field full of fireflies, the biggest displays I've seen in this area. And then there's also woods nearby where you can go and see tons of forest fireflies and just like crazy. And then if you live closer to Lincoln, you might like sort of the Smith Andover land right across from the town hall near the post office. Beautiful displays there. You can also poke around near the public schools and that swimming pool area. Try not to be too weird about it. People are always really nice. Really good. There's like a field called Muster Field back there that's really good. And then you can also keep driving along here and go to Mass Audubon's Drumlin Farm, where you might encounter one Barbara Olson doing a Mass Audubon Firefly Watch project this summer. So Mass Audubon has taken on this citizen science initiative, which is sort of getting, everyone involved going out there, counting fireflies, seeing how many there are. And Drumlin Farm is a great place to do this because you can go up on the drumlin and see, oh, it's like so amazing. You see down the hill, you can see a whole field full of fireflies, and then there's other species in the woods here and various different things. It's a really, really good habitat. And with that, this is my acknowledgement slide. So my committee and my collaborators, my research assistants and funding sources. And I want to answer some of these questions. So I'm going to stop the share and open the chat. Okay, yes. So I'll go in reverse order. So what time of night is best to go looking for fireflies? I didn't get into this, but actually it really depends on what you're looking for, because different fireflies come out at different times. And there are some fireflies that are fully nocturnal. And if you're not there at 10 p.m., you won't even know that they're there. But in general, you can see pretty good displays starting at around 8:30 in the summer. And this would be in June and July. Those are the best months. And in June, Phytinus greenii, which, getting to this question about habitats, is a forest species. It's in all sorts of forests in the Estabrook Woods and in all these other places. And they come out pretty early, around right at 8:30. And then other sort of more field species might come out at 9 or so. So generally my advice would be to get there before sunset and sort of walk around. And I really feel like if they're there, you will find them. You never like barely see a firefly, right? You're either going to see it or you're not going to. And so just find a nice dark habitat, maybe with a source of water nearby, and you're pretty likely to see something by at least 9 p.m., I would say. And then keep going up. So how do they sync up in unison and why? This is a great question. It has to do, how is like beyond my level of knowledge. It's basically they sort of watch each other and change their behavior based on what the ones around them are doing. And it's like a computer program. If they all do that, then eventually it converges on synchrony. Why has to do with visual chaos. So basically, if everything was flashing all the time randomly, it would be really hard for the females to get a word in. So instead, the males kind of cooperate, at least for the first part. They all do their thing, and then they leave some darkness for the females to flash back. And then, they can start to negotiate. Okay. So Carolyn asks, so are you saying they used to be around for longer many years ago? This would not surprise me at all. I think it has to do with the number of species that we have based on and what we used to have. So I think all of the threats I talked about, they affect different fireflies differently. And so some species are doing pretty well and some are really not. And the less diversity we have, the more sort of uniform the firefly season becomes. And so it's going to be shorter as well, basically. And I don't think it's like a totally dire situation. There's still a lot of fireflies out there if you know where to look, but certainly they're not generally as widespread as they used to be. And then a comment about hot, humid days and nights, absolutely. So fireflies actually physically can't fly if it's colder than 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's just kind of ruins the mood completely as far as they're concerned. And so you only really get good displays if it's around 60 or above. And also they really, really, really like wet, they like bodies of water, they like humidity, they're just very soft and squishy. And so that's really good for them. And so on nights when it's just rained, but stopped raining so they don't get hit by raindrops, that's when you see the best displays, I would say.
I remember when I was young, they were all over the yard, but they're not there anymore. So that would be like, 60 years ago. You can find them where I used to find them everywhere, and I haven't seen any here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, so there's like a lot of things. I mean, they are here in Massachusetts. They're even, so I live right next to the Alewife Tea Stop. There's a little nature path around here, and it's super urban, super light polluted, but you do see fireflies there a little bit during the summer. So I think partly it's just, if you put down a concrete sidewalk, fireflies can't live there, right? But then also, I think it has something to do with the fact that it's how our eyes are at night. So because there's so much light out, we often are really light adapted at night, and we're often indoors. We don't really go out on front porches to cool off, after a hot summer day because of air conditioning, right? There's all these theories, right? We're all on Twitter, we're like watching television. And so if your eyes are really light adapted, even if you do look out the window, you won't see fireflies that are there. Because you need to go and intentionally let yourself fully dark adapt, look, and then you start to see stuff. I think that might be part of it, but I think also, I walk around looking for fireflies, and they're really constrained to these little pockets because pesticides and light pollution and all these things just hammer them, and they need these little refuges.
What got you interested in light and fireflies? And
well, to be perfectly honest, so I never saw any fireflies growing up. It wasn't like a dream of mine to understand these magical creatures, although I'm not immune to their charms. I think they're amazing. But it was just during my master's, Taiwan and a lot of East Asia has a really strong firefly culture. There's a big culture of firefly watching as a thing that you do, and firefly watching sites as an economic model of how to have it, you go, you pay an entrance fee, you see the fireflies, you buy a tea or something, and it makes money for the local community. So there was a lot of support for firefly research and firefly researchers. And basically I did my master's there. My advisor asked if I wanted to study fireflies or bees. And it was the easiest decision of my life. And it's been great ever since.
Do the fireflies just come and go in certain regions like other animals seem to? For a while they'll occupy it, and then they'll disappear for reasons we don't know and maybe return several years later. Does that happen?
Oh, I wish that were the case, but I think not. So fireflies are very sort of territorial. They're very localized. So if this is actually kind of a cool realization, but if you have fireflies in your backyard, you will see the same, not the same individuals, but the same population year after year. Those are your fireflies. That's where they live. That's where they mate. That's where everything happens. They don't disperse very well because they're not interested in flying around as adults, right? They're only interested if they patrol their little habitat and they mate and they lay eggs. So this is really cool and it helps them evolve all these amazing flash patterns, but it's not cool because when you remove them from an area, it's hard for them to come back in and fill that gap. So sorry not to have a better, happier answer.
How
And
easy,
you-
how easy is it to grow fireflies in the lab? I mean, is that,
Not easy at all. In fact, nobody's ever really mastered it. Technically, I got an adult from an egg, but I started with 1,500 eggs and I got 10 adults. So it's not really sustainable. So there's some sort of ingredient that we're missing and nobody's really figured it out yet. People in East Asia, once again, have it totally mastered. It's the aquatic larvae, for whatever reason, it's pretty easy actually to keep them. But the terrestrial ones, we run into, and those are the ones we have here where they live in the soil. We run into a lot of problems because they go underground and you can't see them. And you know what? They like warm, wet habitat. You know what else likes warm, wet habitat? Mold. And so you get weird mold and all sorts of, they go missing. I don't know. And then I think there's some sort of ingredient they need from nature that we haven't yet figured out how to provide. Not for lack of trying.
About for short stays, is there a period of time you can keep them and feed them?
Yeah.
A couple of days, a week, or is that just not a good idea?
No, actually, I mean, I do this all the time. I think it's really fun, especially the males, they're often really present in abundance, and I wouldn't advise taking females and moving them to your house, but also it's really hard to find the females anyway. They have their own defense against you doing that. So I'm not too worried about it. But basically, yeah, so the adults, you can capture them with a net. You can use your hands, honestly. They are not very good flyers. And we put them in little containers and we give them slices of green apple. They don't eat, but they like to suck on the juice. And it gives them a little bit of energy, a little sugar to sort of prolong their lifespan. In Taiwan, they give them Red Bull, actually, they seem to really like that. They flash a lot. But if you give them a good bit of apple and then some moist paper towels, so they have that nice humidity, you can have them in your home for about maybe 3 weeks would be the maximum. Around 2 weeks would probably be a little more likely. Oh, yes. And Beth asks about a way to attract fireflies similar to pollinator gardens. This is tricky. I think the best thing, really the best thing would be to have some sort of corridor from an existing firefly habitat to your habitat, because like I said, they're not very good at moving and they're unlikely to cross a suburban street. It's not unheard of, but it's unlikely. But one pretty good way I would say would be to have a water feature and a lot of good leafy dark vegetation. So it's nice and humid and green and dark, and they would like that. And if they really don't come after a couple of years, talk to me, maybe we could do some transplantation. I've always wanted to try it, but it's kind of an undertaking.
So if you have had pesticide type standard lawn care applications, which are awful for everything, like where I live is Concord Green, and it isn't green in the lawn care, would there be a way of stopping that kind of pesticiding and then reintroducing them?
Yeah, I think this is something, and actually there's precedent for this. So you really need to get, depending on the area, it's really good to get sort of stakeholders involved. But at least in Taipei City in Taiwan, they did a huge firefly reintroduction project where they reeded some habitats in public parks and put larvae there and saw fireflies where they hadn't seen them for 50 years. And around here, I know that there's a couple of little institutes, and in fact, the Xerces Society, so that would be xerces.org, has a lot of really good information on fireflies. They're doing a whole firefly conservation project, and they have a list of firefly sites. And two that I'm thinking of are Manship, which is up, I'm gonna forget, it's on the coast, Massachusetts. It's like 30 minutes from here. And also there's a New Cannon Firefly Refuge in Connecticut. And both of these, I think, are interested in doing this sort of a thing, but we don't have like success stories yet because people are sort of just becoming aware of this as an issue. I think like on an individual basis, like, yeah, stop putting pesticides, put some plants, and then like, if they don't come, talk to me and I'll find some females. But, you know, we have to do it a little bit under the radar because that's not technically probably something that the city government would like. I'm not sure, actually.
Wow. As you can see from the chat, that was fascinating. Thank you so much.
That was a real pleasure, really fun. Thanks so much for having me.
And feel free to unmute yourself and just speak right up and ask Avalon any question you might want.
Do they have many natural enemies that prey on them?
Oh, I do have a slide for this actually. Here, let me find it. Oh, yeah. Very few, but you will occasionally see spiders. Spiders seem to be generally kind of immune to the defensive compound, at least some of them. So they'll eat fireflies once in a while. And then frogs, this is this was like kind of went viral. Frogs, I think, will generally only eat a firefly about once in their life, and then they'll figure out pretty quick that that was not a very good thing to do. And birds too. It's just really, the compound's really effective. But oh yeah, what's kind of amazing also is that so if you go out in the field, you'll often see, I would say about once a night, you can find a firefly stuck in a spider web, and you can find it because it will be doing its alarm flash, 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 like really obviously very freaked out. I tend to set them free when I find them because I'm a softie, but I did once see a male firefly that got caught in a spider web. And the spider, I don't know what the spider was doing, but the male was very alarmed. And then right nearby was a female femme fatale of that other group who was answering his flashes, trying to lure him over so she could eat him. And he was having a very bad night. So you do get these interesting interactions, mostly surrounding spiders.
Were you going to tell us something about how they see that you skipped over for lack of time?
Yeah. Oh gosh, what should I? Oh yeah, and then I essentially fireflies have really interesting color vision or lack thereof. So they're very visual, right? And their flashes come in a lot of different colors. So they're anywhere from like a blue green to like a really rich amber, you can see. But those colors are specific to the species. So you can actually use color as a cue to tell what species you have. If your vision's good, it can be kind of hard if it's like really late at night. But fireflies are actually red-green colorblind, so they can't tell the difference between a green flash and a yellow flash. But what they do is essentially, instead of trying to have incredible color vision, they're really good at seeing only one color. So they essentially have filters in their eyes that filter out light that isn't that particular color that they want to see. So if a firefly is green, it will be really good at seeing green. If a firefly flashes yellow, it's really good at seeing yellow. And this has like unfortunate consequences because, for example, the femme fatale fireflies, their color's way different than the things that they're imitating, but the things that they're imitating can't tell because bright green looks the same as dim yellow to them because of their lack of color vision. So firefly color vision is, I think, it's a very interesting topic, and it has relevance to like artificial lighting guidelines, because if fireflies can't see certain colors, those are the colors you can use to light firefly habitats, which is why I really recommend red lights when possible and necessary, because fireflies are pretty bad at seeing red in general.
What other senses do fireflies have? Do they have a sense of smell?
Yes, so they do have a sense of smell, and some of them actually use pheromone cues, like I said, and some use both. Some use both visual cues and pheromone cues to find each other.
Mhm.
They don't have a sense of sound, so you can talk as much as you want around fireflies, although they tell you not to on firefly tours, I've noticed, but technically the fireflies can't hear you. It's just not good for the other guests. They don't have a sense of, they don't have a sense of sound, and then I guess they probably don't have a sense of, I guess they use their antennae to taste as well, kind of like butterflies. Yeah.
Thank you.
We, we humans seem to have evolved to have no interest in eating insects. But I wondered if we were starving on a desert island somewhere, are any of these insects are things that we don't normally eat? Could we survive by eating worms or insects?
Oh, we could. I think, I was just thinking about this literally today as I was walking home. I saw a robin eat a worm, and my first thought was, when a robin eats a worm, like, can it feel that the worm is still alive in its stomach? And this is haunting me. I think worms would probably be a great food if you couldn't feel them moving, because that would be awful. Fireflies are so small and they taste terrible. And I say this not because I've eaten one, but because I've handled them and then like licked my hands. Like that chemical, it's really gross. And they don't have a lot of nutritional quality anyway. But there's like, good evidence, and lots of cultures actually do eat insects, usually like big beetle grubs or sometimes crickets, sort of more neutral, meaty things. Yeah.
Ants. My friend gave me a book, Man-Eating Bugs.
I get it. It took me a little bit.
Yeah. And there was a story about how when the Europeans first hit on Australia, they thought the natives were starving. And we know that because they wrote letters back, and they found these people, these starving people who were surprisingly fat and lazy. And the reason they thought they were starving was because they were eating grubs and bugs and things that nobody would eat unless you were starving. Thus our
It's a really interesting cultural divide. Yeah, there's just like, it seems so gross, to me on the surface, and yet, a big fat grub is a delicacy in a lot of places.
And locusts are apparently quite nutritious, and crickets and ants, and you can make protein flour out of them. And
right, yeah, it's getting pretty popular. As an entomologist, I hear about it quite a lot.
We might have discovered a new restaurant opening in Boston or invented one.
Maybe. I see Barbara wants me to say more about how long adult fireflies live. So in the wild, it could be up to a month, but usually it's more like a couple of weeks, I would say. And it depends on the species again. But also like so different species have their different windows of time that they're active. And so you might see Phytinus greeneye, for example, throughout, June and a little bit of July, but an individual in that time, there's like overlapping windows. So it's not like one individual is alive from June 1st to July 15th. Instead, they kind of go through shifts.
How can you tell if a firefly is beginning to wane in its existence?
That's a great question. It's usually pretty obvious, actually, and it's all the things that you would think. So first, when they're fresh, the lines on their wings, on their wing covers, are really sharp. So you have like a black wing with a really sharp white or yellow outline, and then they kind of get worn down, a little bit ragged, and so they'll just get a little bit sort of dusty and kind of not as handsome. Sometimes their wings will get crooked and they won't be able to fold them correctly anymore. They might lose a leg or two or an antenna. And then also their lantern starts sort of breaking down in this really interesting way. So you'll see a lot more kind of, it almost looks like they have a glitch. There's like, it's kind of broken. So they'll do like only parts of the lantern will light up and it's all staticky almost, or they'll flash sort of randomly when they shouldn't be. And it's just kind of not everything's working as expected. And they'll stop being as active. They'll sort of just sit and then slowly, as they exhaust their energy, die.
Very similar to humans.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's just,
How does wintering over work?
Yes. So fireflies survive the winter normally as larvae in the soil. We don't exactly know what that looks like, but yeah, they're deep down, cold, and insects have this amazing ability. Yeah, they just kind of even freeze, right? And then thaw, come spring, and they're just fine, keep walking around. Ooh,
I have a
how
question.
do you, oh yeah.
I'm just curious. I believe I heard or read someplace about some school children doing some experiments about sending fireflies into orbit, into space, to see what would happen if they would still glow, if they would still, lighten.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I have never heard of that. That's really cool. That must have been, yeah. I bet they would. I bet you anything they would. I don't see why. I mean, the firefly, they command their light, they command their lantern by sending oxygen to it, pretty much. Well, they don't, technically they send neural signals and then the signals displace the oxygen or something, but I feel like that would still work in space, but I've got to look into that. That sounds really fun.
Maybe more of those alarm flashes.
They do a lot of alarm flashes in space. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty dark out there. Maybe they'd be happy, like finally. Barbara wants to know how females pick a good partner. So for fireflies, visibility equals attractiveness. So fireflies like the things that make them really conspicuous. So bright flashes, big flashes are like really sexy to females. And also if the species does a single flash, females like a really long flash, basically. The more flash, the better. But if the species do these sort of flash trains or bursts, they like really short bursts and a lot of them. So whatever is harder to do, I guess, for the male, if it's like, snapping really fast or doing a really long bright glow, it kind of depends on the species, but the basic idea is the female wants the male to be really conspicuous and have to try really hard.
The mating mechanics and the egg production?
So fireflies, they, I don't know. So a lot of insects have this very fun thing called a nuptial gift, which is kind of, so basically it's really common sort of across groups. Essentially the male gives the female a present. It's not just sperm, it's also a bunch of other sort of proteins and nutrients that she can either absorb and sort of metabolize through her reproductive system, or literally eat and metabolize that way. So there's like, and then there's, anyway, it gets really crazy, but in fireflies it's pretty tame. So when the male finds the female, he mounts her, and that's stage one, and then he inserts his little organ, and then they switch to stage two, which I showed a couple photos of this. Let me show you, which yes, so this is stage one on the left, and here they've reached stage two, what we like to call butt to butt, and they do this on the right for like an hour, and in some species they do this for literal days. They'll just be sort of connected butt to butt like this, and they're connected because the male is transferring his nuptial gift, which is also called a spermatophore, into the female. And it's like this they have this really interesting corkscrew shape, and so it's this complicated transfer process, and it has his sperm in it as well as a bunch of nutrients. The female takes those up, and then she has a special organ that dissolves all of the good proteins and uses them for fuel, and then takes the sperm and actually stores it. And then later on, the female can literally decide which male's sperm she wants to use based on who she liked the best. It gets totally insane. And then she lays her eggs, and females are they come out as adults with a certain number of eggs, and they're sort of constantly birding those to stay alive. They're kind of metabolizing them to exist because they don't eat, and then hopefully laying some eggs. And so hopefully by the end of their life, they've kind of laid all their eggs, and hopefully they're all fertilized. And then at that point, they're so spent that they just die.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Can I just ask a follow-up question about that? Just to
Yeah.
understand better. So they have this spermatophore, and they decide when they're going to use the sperm to lay their eggs. And so they meter out their eggs. So they may be doing it over a couple weeks. It's not just one plunk down of eggs.
No, they can be laying, like you'll see in the lab, they'll lay like maybe 10 a day, and usually in clumps. So they'll kind of do it periodically, but like some here, some there. And yeah, what sperm is used to fertilize those eggs is this. Somehow the female has a method of sort of like going to her little storage system and like picking, fertilizing the eggs and then laying them.
So there's a sense she remembers whose sperm is where.
Yeah, incredibly. I mean, it's a totally different world, right? But to be fair, they don't have anything else to think about, right? They're not going to grad school, they don't have day jobs. And so they just spend all their energy trying to reproduce in the best way possible.
Right. Good point.
There was quite an article, I think in the Times in the past week, regarding the different sexual apparatus of different species, and ducks apparently also have this capacity to store, depending on which mate they want to reproduce. Amazing.
Yeah, and some butterflies, and actually a lot of insects, will also have their spermatophore also acts as a physical plug. It's called a mating plug, or there's another name for it, I forget, where it sort of will just kind of stay. It's like a cork in a bottle, essentially. It just kind of stays there and other males can't get in. So there's a lot of like competition between the male and the female to decide who gets to decide who parents the offspring. Oh, Barbara, you're muted if you were saying something.
Oh, wrong button. Yeah, no, that reminds me of how it works, I think, with dragonflies, is that the male will mate with the female, and then if another male comes along, he'll dig out the sperm and
Mhm.
and put in his own.
Yeah.
So it is
And so
interesting.
sometimes, so like when the fireflies are doing the butt to butt for days on end, they're not spending that entire time transferring the spermatophore. I think part of it is the male is literally himself acting as a physical plug, like, you know, sort of guarding his female and trying to take ownership over her. Yeah.
Right.
Really, insects are so amazing and weird.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Do you think they'll ever categorize all the insects on the planet? Seems like they keep discovering new ones all the time.
Oh yeah, and you know, for forever they were saying, you know, there are more beetles than anything else on Earth, but now the wasp people are trying to say there's more wasps than there are beetles, which I think is, I take offense to that. I think, yeah, there's basically no way we can do it fast enough, and actually, there's like a, you know, drama in the field because sort of older methods of describing species are kind of low tech. It involves looking at something and writing a bunch of words about it, and that kind of thing doesn't get funding. It's not as flashy as like a big sequencing project. And so some people think that instead, like, there's no way we could possibly do it, so instead we should just genetically barcode new species and give them like a sequence of numbers and kind of go with that. But certainly it's an urgent issue because you know, they're kind of disappearing all the time, and so you really want to describe what you can before it's gone.
Is there any evidence that the fireflies are trying to evolve to adapt to their changing situation?
I think, I mean, yeah, I think insects in general are really adaptable. They have very short generation times. Fireflies, it's a bit longer. 2 years is kind of long for an insect, but certainly they could evolve. And I think probably, I mean, it depends, but I think one of the best things that a firefly could do right now, given the light, well, so first of all, they should evolve pesticide resistance like ASAP. But also, given the light pollution situation, it would make a lot of sense for them to kind of switch more to pheromone signals back to those chemical cues, which means sort of losing these amazing displays that we all love, but it's just a more reliable signal in the changing world, you know.
Ellery has a question.
Oh, what do insects feel? That's such a good question. I think it's really difficult to say. There's like a lot of like philosophical things associated, I would say, in general. I think the consensus seems to be insects' brains are so simple that it's difficult to justify them being able to experience complex feelings, including, so pain is what I think about the most. Pleasure, I think, isn't that kind of the opposite? So we tend to think, or at least I tend to think, that insects can't feel pain for a couple of reasons. One, their brains are like super small, so if they were dedicating all of their energy to feeling pain, they wouldn't really have many neurons left for all the other stuff they do. And also, insects don't exhibit behaviors that we associate with pain. So one example would be wound tending. So fish exhibit, yeah, fish and everything above fish, and even I think lobsters and some, and you know, big invertebrates, they will sort of, so like a fish, if it gets injured, it will kind of rub its body against the wall of its tank. Sort of, it's like worrying at it. It's kind of revisits it after the original injury. Insects don't do this. If they lose a leg, they keep walking, they don't care. And in fact, some insects, cockroaches, if they are cut in their abdomen and their guts spill out, they will literally eat them. So they don't seem to feel pain in that way. They behave a little bit more like a robot would if you programmed it to sort of jerk its hand away from a hot stove, but otherwise not like worry about the damage, if that makes sense.
Avalon, if it's okay to mention this, you touched on it briefly, is the Audubon, or Mass Audubon, is tracking the fireflies throughout the country, and they have these maps that show where the fireflies are based on surveys. And it's very cool because you can go to this website with Mass Audubon and click on the map from last year and the year before, and suddenly all over the country it lights up as to where fireflies are. But that's
Yeah,
only
it's an
only because
amazing
people
map.
are doing it. So I'm just going to say I'm going to this summer I hope to do these walks at at Drumlin Farm. So we will go out as a group and survey the fireflies based on their flashes, and we fill out a fairly quick form talking about different aspects of the flashes. And it does make you very aware. Most people think, well, I don't know, just a bunch of lights going off. But once you focus on the flashes, you see they can be quite different at different times of the evening. And we usually go out around dusk because there's certain fireflies that come out at dusk and other ones that come out later. So I just wanted to mention, I put my email address. If anybody's interested in potentially going on one of these walks, I'm going to put my email address again in the chat, and you just contact me and I'll let you know when the walks are happening.
Totally. And I 100% recommend this as an activity. Barbara and I have been out in the field. She's an expert. She knows it all. And you guys will have a great time. I was just looking at the map this morning, and there are already fireflies popping up in the south. So they're going to be here any day. And it's going to be really fun.
Yeah, June. Yeah, starting right a little before June or just right around June, they really come out.
Really
I always find the most in June. So did I send that? I don't know if I actually sent it. No, here it is. Here's my address for the walks. And then what I do is I plot it on the map. And it's very cool because you can like zero in and see Drumlin Farm. And then you can see based on what we did, things start lighting up there at Drumlin Farm.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Well, the talk's been wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, this conversation has been so great. I've just had so much fun. Thank you, everybody, for coming and asking such great questions.
Thank you so much for
Thank
giving
you
us,
very much.
sharing the information with us.
All the best on your next step after graduation now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Dr. Owens.
And yeah, if you ever have any questions, here's my email, or you can probably find it somewhere. Just Google me. Happy to answer firefly questions anytime.
Thank you. I learned an immense amount about
Wonderful.
fireflies.
Wonderful.
Thanks again.
Keep smiling.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to stop the meeting.
Just before you do, I have I just wanted to get your address and phone number so I can
It's in the
contact
chat.
you.
Yeah. My phone number.
Oh, yeah. We can do that. Let's do that by email.
You want to? Yeah.
Let's do by
Okay.
email.
Yeah.
Will you send a copy of the talk, Andy?
Yes, I'll do a quick review. I think I kind of like watching it again, but I don't know if I can edit out that. That's our first
Zoom bomber.
Zoom buster or whatever.
Yeah. That's not my first. Ugh, it's so annoying.
Must be maybe it's your topic that attracts them.
I don't know. I know the last time I was in my statistics course. I was like, this isn't, come on. It's not fun. What are you doing? Yeah.
Wait until you begin to look like a firefly. Then you'll know.
But yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Well, I was in one group where we ended up getting flashed with images from Pornhub, and it may have been almost like a maybe a firefly thing. Maybe they were.
I know.
Did they share screen or something?
Yeah. It was
this is our images for today.
a mess.
Right.
All right, I'm gonna go grab some dinner.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
Yeah,
again.
it's been a real pleasure.